Think about the last time you saw a headline about Congress. I mean, it was probably about gridlock, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Just a lot of arguing, a lot of grandstanding, and this overwhelming feeling that, well, absolutely nothing is getting done. But beneath all that very loud, very public theater, there is a quiet engine constantly running. Thousands of bills are being drafted, debated, and passed that directly rewrite the rules of your everyday life.
Yeah, it's this profound disconnect, really, between what makes the evening news and what actually changes the country. I mean, we tend to focus on the static philosophy on TV, but what is really happening in these committees is the literal re-engineering of our civic infrastructure.
Exactly. And that is why we are here. Welcome to Congress in Context. This is our deep dive into a massive stack of recent congressional source material. Our mission today is to just cut through all the partisan noise and decode the actual legislative mechanics moving through Congress right now.
Right, because we are looking at everything today, from healthcare and public lands to, AI data centers and government ethics.
We really are. And just a quick housekeeping note before we jump in. This deep dive is a completely independent, ad-free project. So, to help keep this civic education resource sustainable for everyone, you can support our production infrastructure via the Buy Me a Coffee link right there in your app's show notes.
And that independence is exactly what allows us to focus strictly on the realities of the legislation, just the how and the why, without taking sides or getting bogged down in all the political rhetoric.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, but I think the clearest through line in today's stack of bills is this intense focus on public health, consumer costs, and accountability.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's start right at the pharmacy counter. I was reading through H.R. 6610, the Pharmacy Benefit Manager Sanctions Act, and this really targets the middlemen, doesn't it?
It does. So pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, they are a notoriously complex part of the healthcare system. Essentially, they negotiate with drug manufacturers on behalf of health insurance companies to secure discounts or rebates.
Right.
But the criticism has always been about a lack of visibility. I mean, where do those rebates actually go? Do they lower the cost for the patient at the counter, or does the PBM just pocket the spread?
Right. So it's like they set up a toll booth between the pharmaceutical company and your local pharmacy.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody really knows how the toll is calculated.
Exactly. It's a black box. So what H.R. 6610 does is it gives the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services the actual authority to impose massive civil penalties, up to $100 million per year on PBMs that engage in anti-competitive practices.
Wait, $100 million a year?
Yes. Congress is trying to create a financial disincentive large enough to force these massive corporate entities to change how they operate. Because, a $1 million fine might just be the cost of doing business for them.
Sure, just a line item on a spreadsheet.
Right. But $100 million annually. That changes the math completely.
That is a massive hammer to swing. But here's where I get a little confused. The stack also includes H.R. 9390, which is the Prices on the Wall Act of 2026. This bill says hospitals and surgical centers have to post their discounted cash prices for shoppable services by 2028.
Right.
But wait, didn't hospitals already have to do this? I swear we've had price transparency rules on the books for a few years now. Why do we need a whole new bill?
Well, it is a great question. You are thinking of the hospital price transparency rule that CMS rolled out a few years ago.
Yeah, it's the one.
But that was an agency rule. And frankly, compliance has been incredibly spotty. I mean, hospitals often buried the data in these massive, completely unreadable spreadsheets buried deep on their websites.
Oh, right, where you need a coding degree to figure out what an x-ray costs.
Exactly. So what this new bill does is codify it into statutory law. It specifically targets shoppable services like MRI scans or scheduled labs, and it requires the median cash price to be posted in a way a normal consumer can actually use.
Okay, so looking at these bills collectively, the $100 million penalty for PBMs and the hospital cash price mandates. Are we seeing Congress attempt to regulate the actual pricing mechanism of healthcare, or merely the transparency of those prices?
It is a very deliberate combination of both, but with different targets.
How so?
Well, they are using transparency to empower the consumer market, right? Forcing hospitals to show you the price before you get the service. But for the supply chain middlemen, the PBMs, transparency just isn't enough. So they are introducing direct statutory penalties to regulate the background pricing behaviors that consumers never even see.
That makes a lot of sense. And parallel to these financial health policies, we have some urgent public safety legislation dealing with the chemical supply chain.
Yeah.
Specifically, H.R. 1266. This is the Combating Illicit Xylazine Act.
Yeah, it's a very critical bill right now.
Yeah. For those who don't know, xylazine is often called tranq on the street.
Yeah.
It's an animal tranquilizer that's being mixed with fentanyl, and it is just devastating communities. This bill adds xylazine to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act. But my question is, why Schedule 3 and not Schedule 1? Isn't Schedule I the strictest tier?
It is, but what's fascinating here is the tightrope Congress has to walk mechanically. You see, Schedule 1 is reserved for drugs with no currently accepted medical use, like heroin,
Right.
but xylazine does have a legitimate critical medical use just in veterinary medicine. If you ban it outright under Schedule 1, you paralyze the agricultural and veterinary sectors.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the farmers and vets.
Exactly. So by placing it in Schedule 3, it remains legal for legitimate veterinary use. But it requires strict DEA regulation, locked storage, and tracking through the automated reporting coordination system.
So it puts a barcode on every vial so it doesn't get diverted to the illicit market.
Pres-
And to deal with what's already on the street, we have H.R. 1561, the Alert Communities Act. This one requires first responders to receive training on how to use fentanyl and xylazine test strips.
Right. So it is a structural two-pronged approach. You restrict the bulk supply at the federal level while simultaneously expanding diagnostic capabilities at the local level.
Okay, so Congress is clearly demanding massive transparency from hospitals, drug middlemen, and chemical suppliers. But what about their own transparency?
That was the big question.
Yeah, it is always interesting to see how lawmakers regulate themselves. And that brings us to H.R. 7008, the Stop Insider Trading Act.
This is a highly anticipated piece of legislation. There has been growing public scrutiny over members of Congress actively trading individual stocks while having access to, classified or non-public briefings.
Right.
So H.R. 7008 restricts members of Congress, their spouses, and their dependent children from buying or selling covered investments without giving prior notice.
But wait, didn't the Sackett Act already make congressional insider trading illegal? I feel like we went through this a decade ago.
It did, yes. But the reporting requirements had pretty significant loopholes, and the fines for filing late disclosures, they were often just a couple $100s.
Which is nothing if you're making thousands on a trade.
Exactly. H.R. 7008 establishes a much stricter mechanical framework. If you violate this new process, the penalty is either a flat $2,000 fee or 10% of the transaction value, whichever is greater.
10%, wow. Okay, so if a lawmaker's spouse dumps, say, $1 million in stock right before a market crash, the fine isn't $200 anymore, it's $100,000.
Precisely. It creates a quantifiable, escalating financial risk for the lawmakers. And we are seeing this same focus on ethical infrastructure applied to the judicial branch, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, S532. It requires high-ranking judiciary officials like magistrate and bankruptcy judges to place their covered financial interests into qualified blind trusts within 90 days of taking office.
Wow, just 90 days.
Yep. And they cannot dissolve those trusts until 180 days after they leave their position.
So the judge basically has zero control over what they are invested in while they sit on the bench.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how these bills reflect a structural cross-branch effort. Congress is trying to implement mechanical safeguards to prevent financial conflicts of interest, using explicit timelines and steep financial penalties.
Okay, so we've established some major legislative highlights. Let's pivot slightly to the underlying political dynamics of Congress. We hear so much about the partisan divide, but when you actually read this source material, there are areas of tremendous bipartisan consensus.
Yes, there are.
Veterans issues seem to stand out prominently here.
They really do. S 1383, the Veterans Accessibility Advisory Committee Act of 2025, is a great example of this. It establishes a 15-member committee to advise the VA on facility accessibility. But importantly, it mandates the inclusion of veterans with disabilities and compliance experts to continually audit the VA's infrastructure.
So it's about creating a permanent feedback loop.
Yes, a structural mechanism for constant improvement.
And there is also S 4162, which deals with veterans in the justice system. It mandates the Bureau of Prisons to establish dedicated housing units for incarcerated veterans. But to me, the most impactful part is the administrative fix.
The benefits fix?
Yeah. It amends the law to ensure that a veteran's compensation and payments automatically resume on the exact date of their release from prison.
That is a critical operational fix to a devastating bureaucratic delay. Historically, a veteran might be released from incarceration and then wait months for their benefits to kick back in.
Right, which dramatically increases the risk of homelessness or, recidivism.
Exactly. This structurally closes that gap.
Now, When it comes to areas where Congress has to navigate complex power dynamics, the tension between federal oversight and local control is always front and center. I was looking at S 4146, the Local Data for Better Conservation Act. This amends the Endangered Species Act.
This one is a classic policy trade-off. Currently, the federal government maintains the standard criteria for what constitutes an endangered species. But S 4146 forces the Secretary to actively integrate data collected by the states into those listing determinations.
So instead of federal biologists making the call entirely from a desk in Washington, they have to use data gathered by local wildlife agencies in, say, Wyoming or Florida.
Correct. The argument for the bill is that local agencies have better, more granular data on the ground. The counter-argument is that standardizing conservation is much harder if you defer too much to 50 different state agencies with totally different funding levels.
I see.
So it is a fundamental redistribution of informational power between the states and the federal government.
We also see Congress trying to draw boundaries around power dynamics in the private labor market. Let's look at H.R. 5267, that's the American Franchise Act. This bill amends the National Labor Relations Act to redefine what constitutes a joint employer. The text says a franchisor must exercise substantial direct and immediate control over the essential terms of employment to be held liable.
This has been a massive legal battle for years, because if you work at a franchised fast food restaurant and you have a labor dispute regarding your wages or your scheduling, who is your employer?
Right.
Is it the local business owner who holds the franchise license, or is it the massive global corporation headquartered in another state?
So basically, it's the difference between a landlord who occasionally checks on a property to make sure it's painted the right colors versus a roommate who tells you exactly what time you eat dinner and when you can turn on the lights.
That is a perfect analogy.
If the global parent company is just acting like the landlord, this bill shields them from being sued as a joint employer. They only take on joint liability if they act like that controlling roommate.
Exactly. That phrase, substantial direct and immediate control, is the mechanical legal shield protecting the franchise model.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Now that we understand how Congress regulates money, medicine, and labor, we have to look at how they are adapting their own internal processes to the modern world.
This is fascinating stuff.
It is. We found a procedural bill in this stack, H.R. 9643, that requires federal agencies to identify and manage mass comments and computer-generated comments, specifically including AI, during the regulatory review process.
This raises an incredibly important question about the structural future of democracy. Under the Administrative Procedure Act, whenever a federal agency wants to implement a new rule, say, a new highway safety standard, they are legally required to open a public comment period.
Right. It is designed to let everyday citizens weigh in.
Exactly. But what happens when you introduce AI into that system?
Yeah, like imagine an activist group or even a foreign actor writing a script that generates 5 million entirely unique synthetic public comments and just submits them in a single afternoon.
The administrative system would completely collapse. Agencies are required to review the feedback, but they cannot physically read 5 million AI-generated essays.
No human could.
Right. So H.R. 9643 mandates that agencies develop verification systems to determine if a human is actually submitting the comment and to automatically group identical or synthetically similar mass comments together so the process doesn't just break down.
It is literally legislating a spam filter for democratic engagement.
It really is.
It's wild to think about. But moving from the digital space back to physical geography, I want to touch on how these policies are targeting very specific underserved communities. Let's talk about rural healthcare access.
The stack includes S380, which addresses a growing structural crisis, maternity care deserts. It authorizes $15 million in grants for obstetric emergency training and $5 million for teleconsultation pilot programs.
And this is specifically targeted at rural healthcare facilities that do not have dedicated obstetric units, right?
Exactly, because if a woman goes into premature labor in a rural county, the local clinic might not have an OB/GYN on staff.
Right.
This bill creates a structural system where a remote specialist can securely video call in and guide the local doctor through the emergency.
So it uses technology to bridge a physical gap in care. That's incredible.
Yeah.
We see a similar geographic targeting in energy policy, too, with H.R. 8437, the Geopower Act.
Yes, the geothermal bill.
Right. This one is all about next-generation geothermal energy. It sets up a milestone-based financing program to de-risk geothermal projects, and it prioritizes areas with limited geothermal generation, specifically including Indian land.
Which is vital because the problem with geothermal is that drilling those initial exploration wells is incredibly expensive.
Right, if you drill and find nothing, you just lose millions.
Exactly. So this bill uses federal funding to absorb that upfront mechanical risk so communities that haven't tapped into geothermal can finally get on the grid.
And that transition to the energy grid leads us right into the final major theme of our deep dive today: future implications. The legislation we are seeing indicates that Congress is acutely aware of how vulnerable our underlying infrastructure really is.
The demand for energy right now is skyrocketing, and a lot of that is because of the technology we just talked about, artificial intelligence.
Yeah. H.R. 6529 is the Protecting Families from AI Data Center Energy Costs Act. Large AI data centers consume a staggering amount of electricity. So this bill requires the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, to hold a technical conference to figure out how to protect residential ratepayers.
Right, because the fear is that a massive tech company builds an AI data center in your state. It drains the electrical grid, requires the state to build new power plants, and then your personal monthly electric bill goes up to subsidize it.
Right, the residents foot the bill for the tech giants.
Exactly. The bill is an attempt to figure out how to isolate those costs, so the tech companies pay for the power they use without passing the structural burden to the local citizens.
But the irony here is, while AI is straining the grid, Congress also wants to use AI to fix the grid.
Yes, it's a bit of a paradox.
H.R. 9339, the Affordable Innovation for the Grid Act, directs the Department of Energy to evaluate using artificial intelligence and high-performance computing to expedite grid interconnection studies.
This is a huge bottleneck mechanically. Right now, if a company builds a new solar farm or natural gas plant, they can't just plug it into the grid.
Right.
They have to wait in an interconnection queue while engineers manually study how this new power source will affect the physics of the entire regional grid. That queue can take years.
Years. Wow.
Yes, so Congress is asking, can AI run those complex grid simulations in a fraction of the time and just clear the backlog?
So they basically want to use the machine to process the paperwork faster.
Pretty much.
But of course, with all this technology comes massive vulnerabilities. Let's talk about national security and supply chains. S4429 is the P&S Act. This strictly prohibits the importation, sale, or introduction of connected vehicles and covered software without a specific license.
And when we say connected vehicles, we aren't just talking about fully autonomous self-driving cars. Almost every modern car sold today connects to a cellular network for navigation, diagnostics, and over-the-air updates.
Right, my car updates in the driveway overnight.
Exactly. The legislative intent here is to prevent foreign adversaries from embedding software in those vehicles. If a foreign entity gains remote access to a network of thousands of cars on American highways, the physical security risks are unimaginable.
I mean, they could theoretically disable brakes or shut down engines all at once.
Precisely. It's a massive network vulnerability.
That is genuinely terrifying. And it shows why supply chain visibility is becoming a top priority across the board. We're seeing it in pharmaceuticals, too. S3788 requires that finished drug labels physically print the name, place of business, and the unique facility identifier of the original active ingredient manufacturer.
Currently, you might look at a pill bottle and see the name of the distributor, but you have no idea where the actual chemical compounds were synthesized.
Right, it could be anywhere.
Exactly. This removes the anonymity from the global chemical supply chain. It is a clear legislative trend toward total trackable visibility from the overseas factory floor directly to your medicine cabinet.
And this tightening of the supply chain, it extends to the financial pipelines in our political system as well.
Yeah.
The last bill I want to highlight is H.R. 9771. This introduces severe financial penalties for tax-exempt organizations that accept contributions from foreign nationals and then funnel that money into political committees.
Foreign money in U.S. elections is already illegal, but enforcement against tax-exempt dark money groups has historically been difficult mechanically.
Right.
This bill escalates the stakes dramatically. The penalty is 100% of the contribution amount for the first offense and 200% for subsequent offenses. Plus, the organization loses its tax-exempt status for 2 years.
So what does this all mean? When you pull back and look at the entire stack today, from tracking where your drug ingredients come from, to securing the software in your car, to penalizing foreign political money, the trajectory is undeniable. The future of federal legislation is intensely focused on auditing and securing all of our supply chains, both physical and digital, against vulnerabilities.
That is the overarching shift we are witnessing, and it brings me to a final thought for you to consider as we wrap up today's analysis. We have looked at bills attempting to build spam filters for AI-generated public comments, and bills trying to protect the local power grid from the massive energy demands of those same AI systems.
Right.
This raises an important question for all of us. Are we entering an era where Congress must routinely, structurally legislate the actual boundaries of human versus machine interaction within our most basic civic and physical infrastructure?
Wow. It is a wild thing to ponder. The rules of engagement in this country are changing rapidly. So if you want to dive into these blueprints for yourself, we highly encourage you to engage beyond just the ballot box. You can use resources like congress.gov to find and read the exact text of the bills we discussed today.
Yes, the primary sources are all there.
Look up H.R. 7008 on insider trading or S380 on rural maternal care. Read the text, understand how the legislative mechanics actually function, and then contact your local representatives to express your views objectively based on the facts.
True civic engagement requires an understanding of the machinery.
It absolutely does. Well, we want to express our immense gratitude to you for joining us on this deep dive. Again, you can help keep this ad-free, independent civic education resource sustainable by using the Buy Me a Coffee link located in the episode description. The government is complex, but together we can figure out how it works. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.